I've never been so wet in my whole life.
That's what she said, and by she, I mean the chicken. You just heard it. Hold on, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. I filmed 2 intros in case I thought the first one was inappropriate. The Wizard of Oz is considered one of the greatest movies of all time. It is iconic. It is a cultural touchstone of American history. But it also has one of the most beautifully terrifying sequels ever made. A sequel that's not actually a sequel. Wizard of Oz is weird by itself, like it starts with involuntary manslaughter and things just kind of go downhill from there. But the 1939 movie never fully commits to some of the more bizarre, darker elements from the book. For example, the Tin Man was originally a flesh and blood man named Nick Chopper, but the Wicked Witch of the East cursed his axe so that every time he chopped wood, he would chop off one of his body parts, which he would then replace with a tin limb until he was entirely made of tin. So that's cool. However, the 1985 movie Return to Oz overcommits. It goes so hard for no reason. Like, if I tell you that one scene from this movie haunted my nightmares for years, chances are you would say, which one? Because there's multiple options. But now, as an adult, I love Return to Oz so much more than Wizard of Oz. I kind of wonder if it's a Stockholm Syndrome type of thing. Like, this movie is stamped on my brain regardless, so I just kind of adapted around it. Return to Oz is a Disney movie, and I think it's one of Disney's best movies. Word on the street is that Disney wanted to own the original Wizard of Oz movie so bad back in the day, but MGM said, "Nuh-uh, you can't have it." So Disney went and bought the rights to the other books in the series. MGM would later sell the rights for Wizard of Oz, but not to Disney. They sold it to Warner Brothers. By the point Return to Oz was made, Wizard of Oz had entered public domain, but that was just the book. And in the book, Dorothy had silver slippers. MGM owned the ruby slippers. And even though Disney initially claimed that this wasn't a sequel to Wizard of Oz, like, this was its own thing. This was a different adaptation of different books. They still coughed up the cash to pay MGM to use the ruby slippers. This movie also makes no sense without the context of the first movie, but you'll see. This wasn't Disney's final attempt at staging a flaccid coup at claiming the Wizard of Oz franchise. Eventually, they embarked on their top secret project, Oz, the Great and Powerful, that was released in 2013. The general consensus about that movie is that it was fine. You know, not really great. Just kind of okay. I say top secret project because they were so protective over this movie that they filmed it under a code name, which is apparently not very typical. And that's something you would expect from like a juggernaut like Avengers Endgame, or I think The Phantom Menace was filmed under a code name. It's not for something like a Wizard of Oz prequel starring James Franco as the wizard. However, once the project did come to light, you can bet that the WB's lawyers were watching it like a hawk to make sure that nothing resembled the 1939 film too closely. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about Return to Oz, a beautifully weird 80s fever dream that has a complicated relationship with both its predecessor and its source material. I thought about doing this in a video essay format, but I decided I'm just gonna move through the movie sequentially and recap the plot and discuss various elements as we go. Since I figured that probably not that many people have a detailed scene-by-scene recall of this movie from 40 years ago. Although maybe they do, since my timing for this video is very poor. It's been on my list for like a year, but I kept putting it off to work on other things. And then Wicked came out, and then I feel like everyone was talking about this movie for a hot minute. So now my video feels very late, but I don't think any of those people were dressed like the Gnome King, so there you go. That's the value that I add to the conversation. Anyway, Return to Oz opens with Dorothy Gale being sent to a mental institution. Yep, Auntie Em heard her stories of Oz and decided to haul Dorothy off to inpatient psychiatric care. I feel like kids just tell fun little made-up stories, like they have very active imaginations. If my nephew came to me and told me this crazy tale about killing a witch and riding in a hot air balloon, I wouldn't have him committed. I would just be like, that's nice. Now tell Aunt Christina where your dad moved the liquor cabinet so I can get through Easter. By the way, Dorothy is played by Fairuza Balk, whose most iconic role is probably in The Craft, but her second most iconic role is definitely this. Dorothy tries to kind of explain the plot of The Wizard of Oz to the doctor.
Just how did you get back from Oz?
With my ruby slippers.
Which is a weird choice that I feel is specifically motivated by this movie trying to kind of set up various elements from The Wizard of Oz for the viewer. By the way, Return to Oz includes the Tin Man's original backstory.
And he kept on cutting off all the other parts of his body until it was all made of tin.
Dorothy meets a weird little girl who gives her a carved pumpkin.
This is for you.
Which Dorothy then combs? Okay, maybe she does need some help. So, what's the doctor's treatment plan? Electroshock therapy. Administered in the middle of the night during a storm. As you do. Fortunately, the storm knocks out the power, and you just hear someone somewhere screaming. So yeah, Dorothy decides to make a break for it with the help of Pumpkin Girl. The two girls jump in a river, and Pumpkin Girl disappears, probably dead, I don't know, and Dorothy is carried to Oz. And her animal companion this time isn't Toto! It's a chicken named Bellina.
Who else?
So yeah, no Toto. But Bellina and Toto were both left behind on the farm. So why is the chicken here and not the dog? That's a rhetorical question because we don't know. In typical Oz fashion, they encounter a lunch pail tree. And the whole thing with Oz adaptations is that there's a very specific visual language where stuff from the real world shows up, but in a magical way. There is a lunch pail tree in the books, so we had to see Auntie Em specifically leave Dorothy with a lunch pail at the mental asylum. Hence, lunch pail tree. The rocks are spying on Dorothy and report her to a mysterious unseen figure. They also think her traveling companion is weird.
She has a chicken with her.
By the way, Bellina the chicken is from the books and was Dorothy's companion to Oz at one point. This movie does take aspects from the original stories, but it kind of mashes them together. Like a Frankenstein's monster, but a fun Frankenstein. Like one who does the monster mash. You'll discover that Dorothy kind of drops these explanatory bits of narration to bridge the gap between this movie and Wizard of Oz.
Scarecrow.
He's the king of Oz, Bellina. This is our old house. The one the tornado blew away.
It serves a dual purpose of showing that you totally didn't have to watch Wizard of Oz before watching this movie because it's not a sequel. And it also bridges some of the gaps between the Wizard of Oz movie and the original book. Because again, this is a different adaptation of different books, so things are different. She discovers the yellow brick road all torn up. The Emerald City is in ruin. Sort of like Narnia, it seems like there's been a greater passage of time in Oz than there's been on Earth. Since at the beginning of the movie, Auntie Em says that it's only been 6 months since the tornado. People in the Emerald City have turned to stone, and there's this group of dancing women with no heads. And then Dorothy finds her old friends.
It's a Tin Woodsman. Oh, cowardly lion.
She calls the Tin Man the Tin Woodsman because that is what he's called in the books. Dorothy finds some foreboding graffiti. What are the Wheelers? Oh, just this.
Come here. Chicken!
Now we're getting to the nightmare fuel. The Wheelers communicate via shrieks. I think their squeaking and screaming is supposed to represent the mental hospital and like the squeaking wheels of the gurney and the vague, distant screaming. The Wheelers apparently feel very strongly about chickens.
Got a chicken in there with you?
Because they serve the Gnome King, who is staunchly anti-chicken.
The Gnome King doesn't allow chickens anywhere in Oz.
Since Dorothy's last traveling companions are seemingly dead, she needs new ones, like this guy.
I am Tick-Tock, the Royal Army of Oz.
His name is Tick-Tock. Tick-Tock functions via a series of gears that need to be consistently rewound. One is for thinking, one is for talking, and one is for action, and this will be important almost immediately. So Tick-Tock's like, okay, I'm gonna come up with a plan to get past the Wheelers.
Make sure my think works are extra tight and I will formulate a plan.
His plan? Just beating the crap out of them.
Boys try to touch my junk, gonna smack him if he getting too drunk.
They interrogate a Wheeler and discover that Princess Mombi is the only one who knows where the Scarecrow is. Princess Mombi has an amazing outfit that I thought about attempting to recreate, and then I realized exactly how much work that would take and said, no thank you, I'm the Gnome King. She leads Dorothy through a hall of heads, and then she takes off her own head and puts on a new one.
What do you think?
Cool. Just casually swapping heads. There is a scene later that is so terrifying that it just dominated my memory for years, and I completely forgot that this scene even existed. By the way, it's later revealed that these heads belonged to the headless dancing girl statues that we saw outside. But Mombi likes Dorothy's head, so she's going to lock Dorothy in a tower until her head is the right age for harvesting. Tick-Tock is useless because he needs to be rewound, and Dorothy is just like, don't even worry about it.
It can't be helped, Tick-Tock.
Her general apathy towards her own survival is very relatable. It's like me when I experience turbulence on an airplane. I'm just like, oh, well, here we go. If that's a live chicken in these scenes, and I assume it is, then I feel very bad for that chicken. Mombi locking Dorothy away in the tower is very reminiscent of the mental hospital lady locking Dorothy in her room. She finds a dusty old painting of her friends, and the Scarecrow looks ridiculous. This can't be how he actually looks in 3 dimensions. The painter probably just hates him. And in this locked room, Dorothy meets Jack Pumpkinhead.
My name's Jack. Jack Pumpkinhead.
That's why we had to see the pumpkin that Dorothy combed at the beginning. They can't just give us a pumpkin-headed man without any foreshadowing. That would be insane. I remember thinking Jack was terrifying as a kid, but as an adult, he's so sad.
I've been alive such a short while, and I'm afraid of spoiling before I've seen anything of the world.
So Tick-Tock, Jack, and Billina need to assemble something. While Dorothy goes to steal the key to open Mombi's locked cabinet that contains the powder of life that was used to animate Jack. And here we go. This is it. This is the most terrifying scene in the movie. Mombi's head is in the cabinet, and Dorothy accidentally wakes her up.
Dorothy, girl.
Also, the new head is the nurse lady from the mental hospital. She even tries to take a little bite out of Dorothy, and all of the other heads begin to scream. Mombi's headless body rises from the bed and lumbers towards Dorothy, while the gallery of heads continues to shriek. Mombi breaks the glass on the cabinet containing her head and grabs it. Fortunately, Dorothy is able to make it back to her friends and sprinkle the powder of life on their creation. And now we discover what they were building up there.
Can you flap your wings?
I don't have any wings.
Now we get to...
It's an abomination. Mombi bursts in just as they're able to escape out the window and take flight. So now that our heroes are safe for a moment, can we talk about their flying device creature thing? It has the head of a Gump, and the body is basically 2 couches tied together and some palm fronds. But the Gump still has his memories.
The last thing I remember is walking through the forest and hearing a loud noise.
Is it just me, or is that deeply disturbing? Like you were just living your normal life in your normal body, and then one day you are shot and killed and your consciousness ends. Following your death, your head is severed and mounted to a wall, but it doesn't affect you. You are lost in the endless sleep of death. And then one day, your head is placed on what is essentially a Goodwill donation and sprinkled with magic powder and brought back to life. This is your body now. Your legs are palm fronds, and your torso is 2 couches tied together with rope.
What am I anyway?
You're just, a thing with a Gump's head on it.
You are no longer you. You are just a thing now, built for the purpose of flying this group of weirdos to the Gnome King's mountain. You are alive, but is it truly living?
I'm just glad I have my own head to be sleepy with.
Yeah, head and body both attached to each other. She has no idea the cosmic horrors she hath wrought. Come morning, the ropes holding the Gump together begin loosening, and it's not really indicated whether or not this causes him pain. Jack loses his head, of course, so they have to dive to try to catch it, but then the Gump completely falls apart, and they just begin plummeting.
It's all right, Jack! It can't be helped now!
Again, I do enjoy Dorothy's cavalier attitude towards mortal peril, but they all manage to land safely.
What about the Gump? He's all in pieces.
And good riddance. I'm much happier just being ahead, thank you.
They want to put the Gump back together, but he's like, no thank you, just let me die.
Think we should tie him back on the sofa. Then at least he could walk.
Oh no.
And coincidentally, they landed right on the Gnome King's mountain, and the king himself speaks to them through the rocks. Dorothy demands that he give back what he stole, which is presumably the Scarecrow and, the Emerald City. The Gnome King opens the ground under her feet, and Dorothy just falls down into the mountain.
All those emeralds in the Emerald City really belong to me.
You know, I hate to say it, but I think the Gnome King has a point.
I was just taking that what was mine.
Also, Dorothy is a bit of a hypocrite because when she first landed in Oz, she killed the Wicked Witch of the East and then stole her shoes. Technically, those shoes should have gone to, her next of kin and not, her murderer. However, Dorothy and Glinda refuse to hand over the shoes, and then Dorothy also kills the Wicked Witch of the West. So I don't really think she's that much better than the Gnome King. When Dorothy hits the bottom, we briefly glimpse the Scarecrow before he disappears. And you know what? The painting earlier was accurate. This is what he looks like. I assume this horrifying visage serves 2 specific functions. 1, to haunt me, and 2, to avoid any potential legal ramifications of too closely resembling a man in a scarecrow suit from the 1939 movie. The Gnome King reveals that he's turned the Scarecrow into an ornament. We don't really know what that means yet. Dorothy's upset, and the Gnome King, comforts her?
No. Don't cry.
is worth saying that I like the effect that they're using for the Gnome King and for the different stone faces. They're somehow managing to be both very simplistic while also being very expressive while also being, like stone. He makes Dorothy an offer. If she or her friends pick the right ornament that's actually the scarecrow, they're all free. Just walk on into this creepy hand cave to get started. The Gump is up first, despite probably never even having met the scarecrow.
Why doesn't the sofa go first?
The endless indignity of his existence. Also, I love that line for just how ridiculous it is. The Gnome King is very hospitable and offers them snacks.
Limestone pie and hot melted silver.
And Dorothy's eating it. I actually looked it up, and limestone apparently is edible in small amounts. So, the more you know. Then there's a clap of thunder, and we see the Gnome King with human eyes. And now they're learning the consequences of failing the Gnome King's little game.
So now he's become part of my collection.
So I need to mention here that Bellina has been hiding inside Jack's head this whole time, so the Gnome King has no idea that there's a chicken in his mountain. But Mombi is on her way to warn him with a chariot pulled by her wheelers, and wow, those scenes are a vibe. So Jack fails at his guess, and then it's TikTok's turn.
Do not worry, Dorothy. I am going to guess correctly.
I doubt it. With each failed guess, the Gnome King is looking more and more tangible, like a man made out of stone rather than just a stone with a man's face. And he's sporting some snazzy new shoes.
They're very powerful.
They look great on him. This scene is very important because, one, Disney Plus gave this movie a modern PG rating because of tobacco usage, which we see pictured here, and two, because Disney had to pay MGM to use those ruby slippers instead of just going with the silver slippers from the book. Also, the Gnome King needs some Visine. The ruby slippers are what helped him conquer Oz, and the implication is that they just fell from the sky when Dorothy left. The Gnome King just keeps showing off the ruby slippers. Like, okay, man, it's getting weird now. Put your feet away. It feels like it's just Disney showing off the ruby slippers. Like, look, we got them, as opposed to our magnanimous overlord, the Gnome King. I read online that the original script intended for the Gnome King to have turned the ruby slippers into a ruby belt, but then Disney said, nah, we'll let this rock man with delicate feet just rock these sparkly shoes. Rock. However, I couldn't find a concrete source for that information. As sometimes with movies like this that were released before the digital age, there were interviews or articles or various other media that were not uploaded and preserved. So sometimes these kinds of widely circulated statements or theories turn out to be absolutely correct, but you just can't find the original source for the information. But I still like to take things with a grain of salt. Anyway, apparently TikTok's action gear has wound down, so he's just like standing there in the middle of the room, and Dorothy has to go in to wind him up. The ornament situation is essentially a really big disorganized antique store, and when people get turned into ornaments, they're actually getting turned into like miscellaneous little knickknacks. So it turns out that TikTok had an idea. His action gear didn't really wind down. It was actually a trick to get Dorothy into the room so she could watch him choose and then see what happens. It's a good plan, but it just doesn't work because TikTok disappears. The Gnome King has hair and colorful jewels now.
You're all that's left.
He's beautiful. Each person had 3 guesses, and Dorothy basically throws away her first 2. Mombi does reach the Gnome King to warn him.
She stole my ruby key, my powder of life, and valuable antiques which she made into a flying sofa.
But the Gnome King is already knee-deep in his whimsical little saw trap.
Why didn't you just transform them all right away?
It's more fun this way.
Like, obviously he's been getting turned more and more into like a human man with each ornament, but how did he get turned into stone in the first place? Or was he always stone and he just really wants to be a flesh and blood person?
Soon, I will be completely human.
We don't know, and it doesn't matter. Dorothy closes her eyes and finds a big green gemstone, which turns back into the Scarecrow. And the Scarecrow has a weird physicality.
You were green.
What?
You are a green ornament.
They realize that people from Oz turn into green objects. And it is here that I wonder if the Gnome King has been colorblind this whole time. And as they transform more and more ornaments back into people, the Gnome King starts turning back into stone. The ornament room begins caving in as the Gnome King approaches. The Scarecrow, and like, seriously, what are his eyes? Are they supposed to be eyes, or are they supposed to be fabric that looks like eyes? And what's with all the flailing? But anyway, the Scarecrow finds a vase that Dorothy turns back into Jack and Bellina. The Gnome King is furious.
Why doesn't the sofa go first?
Why do you keep saying that? Anyway, he eats the sofa, but they're able to grab the Gump's head and run. The Gump just has to deal with the fact that his original body was probably eaten, and now his new body was also eaten. The rocks turn into gnome creatures that grasp at them as they try to escape. Just some more horrifying visuals. Nothing to worry about, children who might be watching this movie and later needing to sleep. The Gnome King is about to eat Jack when he hears clucking, and Bellina lays an egg that falls right down the Gnome King's gullet. The Gnome King's still creepily human eyeballs turn to stone. Good night, sweet king. All the gnomes retreat. Now we know why the Gnome King and his subjects hated chickens so much. You know, sort of like the same reason that I hate mosquitoes, so I get it. And this once powerful sorcerer who wielded the ruby slippers crumbles away to nothing.
Listen to gnomes.
Dorothy now puts on the ruby slippers and casts a spell.
I wish all of us to return there safely.
Fortunately, those dancing girls have their heads restored when they turn back into flesh and blood people, because otherwise that would have been a mess. But it works, and they're all teleported back to the Emerald City, including Mombi. The Gump also has an amulet that turns into TikTok, so he's there too. And with the Emerald City restored, the denizens celebrate with a parade. Dorothy is riding on the Cowardly Lion's back, and he too has just stagnant and dead eyes like the Scarecrow. I kind of think there's just a man in that suit walking on all fours with a child on his back. TikTok got all shined up.
The party don't start till I walk in.
The people all demand that Dorothy take the throne as queen. The Scarecrow was king, so I wonder if that means they would have to get married. I'm sure he would abdicate. But Dorothy turns it down.
I've got to go back.
She just wishes that she could be in both places, in Oz and in Kansas, at the same time. And then, as if in response to her wish, we see the slippers shimmer. A girl appears in the mirror behind Dorothy, and it's the same girl who we saw at the beginning in the mental hospital who gave Dorothy the jack-o'-lantern that, she combed and jumped into the river with her. But more than that, she's Ozma and Jack's mom. The dancing girls and their familiar heads give us Ozma's backstory. Like now with the 11th hour when the movie is almost over.
Her father was King of Oz before the wizard came.
So Dorothy returns the ruby slippers to Ozma and is ready to go home. Bellina's like, hell no am I leaving this magical fantasy land where I can talk to go back to a farm in Kansas. Same girl. Dorothy has to say goodbye to all of her weird, scary-looking friends before she's teleported back to Kansas, just right into the mud. Couldn't find some soft grass to put her on. It was just right in the dirt. Toto ends up finding Dorothy, and her aunt and uncle are relieved to see her. I initially thought that maybe her uncle showed up because he, regretted the whole, hey, let's drop our niece off at inpatient psychiatric care for electroshock therapy thing. But no.
The clinic was hit by lightning. It burned to the ground.
So the doctor was the same actor that played the Gnome King, and he's dead now. And we also see the nurse / Mombi being carted away in what looks like maybe like a police wagon, as if she's under arrest. But I don't know why she would be arrested, because it's not like child services, 1, existed, or 2, came in and shut the place down. Like, it burned down in a freak act of God. However, the image of the nurse through her bars mirrors the image of Mombi in her cage, and Ozma did say that Dorothy stripped Mombi of her magic.
Dorothy has punished her by removing her magical powers.
So with the significant look between Dorothy and the nurse, there's kind of an implication that this might be Mombi, forced to live out the rest of her life in non-magical Kansas. At the end, all is well. Dorothy is safe and the house is nearly rebuilt. Dorothy summons Ozma in the mirror, which is a thing she can apparently do, and she calls Auntie M to come take a look, but Ozma shakes her head. So is the implication that Ozma is Dorothy somehow? Because Dorothy wished to be in both places at once, and the slippers kind of reacted, and then Ozma appeared, and she kind of appeared in the mirror and acted like Dorothy's reflection. But we saw this girl at the beginning of the movie at the mental hospital. And then during some of the scenes in Mombi's palace, there was this green being in the mirror that is implied to be Ozma. And when we get her backstory, like her father was king a long time ago, and she fully predates Dorothy coming to Oz. So I don't think Ozma would be Dorothy's doppelganger. Like, if anything, Dorothy might be Ozma's Kansas doppelganger. But that would be weird. And if you also did want to imply that they were the same person, why wouldn't you use the same actress? I don't know. As with most things in this movie, we don't know. And it doesn't matter. And that's Return to Oz. It's confusing and a little horrifying, but I love it.